Hey, welcome to Where All the Ladies At. This is a podcast where I dive deep into history, myth, and legend and try to figure out where the fuck the women went. Sounds like a good idea? That's cool. If you're wondering who the hell I am Kim. I am your podcast host. I am a history nerd, a myth lover, and an archaeology groupie. I also happen to be a writer on the as well. So, yeah. That's pretty cool. And this month we are celebrating Pride. Of course, it is June. I'm a little behind, guys, so you're going to get a whole wave of them in the last 2 weeks. I hope that's okay. I didn't want to go without celebrating the month, and I got a little backed up. That being said, before we jump into the topic of the day, which, by the way, is Billie Holiday, and I'm going to air quote this because she was never an out member of the queer community, but there is enough stories and things like that I chose to link her into the Pride Month celebration. So, that being said, I currently have been doing 8 podcasts a month. I am going to be knocking that down to 2. So you will get 1 myth and 1 history, but that is going to free up more time for me to do more stuff on social media, the Medium publication, as well as start releasing a newsletter, also writing ebooks, so that we can build a community and I can actually give you guys some offerings that you guys might like. So there is that. Coming up soon with the next couple weeks, I should have my first ebook up and ready on Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon. It is about Elizabeth Bathory. And starting in July, I think I will be able to do the newsletter. And then sometime in July or August, I will be uploading my website or publishing my website. Yeah, that's the word that should be used. So that there'll be more places in the future. You may find that there's going to be merch and all that kind of stuff. So the reason that I'm cutting back on the podcast is so I can have more time to do those. And if I can build a community and build a business out of that stuff, then maybe there'll be more podcasts coming down the road because I really do enjoy doing them. I just want to make sure I diversify everything and give everybody something that's more cohesive and more, what's the word I'm looking for? Diverse. So that being said, if you do want to reach out to me, you can always do so through my social media. I have TikTok, Instagram, as well as Facebook. And if you don't have social media, you can check out the email that's there. If you want to support the podcast, you can do that by simply like, comment, follow, share, subscribe, do all that kind of good stuff. Any interaction with the audio or the video on their respective platforms will help the algorithm see that there's people interested and maybe push me out to more people, so therefore we can build the community. If you do want to kick a little cash my way, currently the only way to do that is to visit my Buy Me a Coffee and my Patreon, where you can donate. But as I said, within the next couple weeks, you will have some things that you can get there, both like a newsletter. There is a subscription thing where you can do a monthly thing where you get different things, and then there also will be like the newsletter there as well. If you want to know more about this so much, check out my Medium publication. As I said, I am a writer, so there's more stuff there as well. And if you're into magical, mystical, spiritual things, make sure you check out my other podcast. It's called Our Mystic Road Trip, and it's pretty cool. So that's it for the shameless plugging and housekeeping. Now we can get started into the lovely lady of the day, Miss Billie Holiday. Lady Day, all these things. She is an icon. And I am going to preface this by knowing, please don't come at me. I know she wasn't, as I said in the beginning, a out member of the community, but there's enough historical references and things like that to indicate that she was a part of the community. So we're going to go with that, and we are celebrating Pride, and we are going to include everybody, whether they're out or in. They are still a viable member of the community. Yes? So if you want to know more about Pride, make sure you go back and check out the previous podcast. That is about Audre Lorde. There I give a little spiel about Pride. I don't want to do it on every video because I feel you might get bored with it, but pride is super important so that we can really support inclusivity and acknowledgement and acceptance. And that's what it's about. So with that being said, we're just going to jump in. And as always, we're going to start by talking about where she was from, what was going on at the time, and how it impacted her in general. So, so she was born in Baltimore, and later on she moved to other places, but Baltimore was big. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to talk about it. So Baltimore was kind of this really complex social landscape in the 1920s to 1940s, right? As is much of America at the time, especially on the East Coast and in larger cities, right? Baltimore was this city of contrast, right? It had a very rich African-American cultural and creativity area, but it was also very segregated and very unequal because Baltimore's in Maryland. And for those that aren't real familiar with the states, I'm going to say something, I don't know if it'll be controversial, but I have found Maryland is like one of those states that's kind of in an odd situation because it's near Virginia, so it still has, some of the more rural places still have some very southern-like attitudes, but it's also very, very northern too. It's near Washington, D.C. as well, so like there is this dichotomy, right? And at this time, everything was segregated, and everything was equal, right? There was systematic racism, there was Jim Crow laws, and both of these things shaped the daily life. This really restricted the opportunities for Black people, people of color, especially women. It just restricted those opportunities greatly, But despite these harsh realities, right? Black women in Baltimore were kind of really fiercely resilient. Black women in general. Let me just be honest with you. I've had some very strong Black women in my life. And they were always very fiercely resilient and very, very like active and very empowering. They were very much about stepping up. Their voice, they were not going to let their voices not be heard, kind of thing. So I think that Baltimore women, I'm sure, were, but just in general, women of color, just in general, women, but women of color are very resilient. Here's the thing. When it came to women, right, women faced racial, right? So here's the thing. Black women were coming at two directions, right? Not only was there racial barriers because there was segregation, but there were gender barriers too. So things like jobs and education, voting rights, social mobility, these were all pretty restricted for them. Black women, though, and women of color refused to accept silence or passivity. They weren't going to do it. So they started becoming leaders in civil rights, public health, communal organizations, right? Their activism was very often grassroots, very community focused, and very intertwined with the broader fight for racial equality, right? You had people like Lily Mae Carroll Jackson, right? She was the mother of the civil rights movement. She was the leader of Baltimore's NAACP chapter for 3 decades, right? Actually, over 3 decades. And she was instrumental in dismantling Jim Crow laws locally. She particularly focused on school desegregation and public facilities. She was very strategic. She was very patient. And she really challenged legal situations and really led grassroots organization. And all this really talked about laid a very critical groundwork for civil rights movement nationally, right? She was known for advocating nonviolent protest and building coalitions across racial and economic lines. So very much like in line with like Martin Luther King. Right? You also had Estelle Hall Young and the Progressive Suffrage Group, right? This was a club that was founded in 1915 and was one of Baltimore's first Black women's suffrage groups. And this was intended to really mobilize Black women around voting rights and political participation shortly after the 19th Amendment in 1920. So here's what you guys have to understand, right? This granted women the right to vote, but that was really white women. Okay, black women were not really given that opportunity. They were actually denied a lot of the time because of Jim Crow, right? So this club really worked to not only on feminism, but also on voter education and fighting disenfranchisement, right? Disenfranchisement. She and her peers, Estelle Hall Young I'm talking about, really bridged early 20th century suffrage with mid-century civil rights activism. So I think what I would say about this is it was really sad because the women's movement, it was so whitewashed that it left out a good majority of the women, right? Black and brown women were not included in the women's suffrage movement. There was still that line, and that, I think, is, I mean, my opinion, I think that's why it took so long for things to happen. If we had all banded together, realizing that we've all had the same problems, I think we would have gotten further sooner, right? You also had Bessie Louise Moses and the Baltimore Birth Control Clinic, which, hey, so Bessie Louise Moses was a black female physician and public health advocate. She founded the Baltimore Birth Control Clinic in 1927, and this was a time when birth control was really stigmatized and most often illegal, right? But her work was groundbreaking. It provided reproductive health access to black women, and that helped combat both racial and gender inequalities in healthcare, right? The clinic empowered women with knowledge about family planning and bodily autonomy, and this was pretty revolutionary, and because there was very strict social norms at the time, right? Her advocacy really put broader movements of women's health and racial justice together, and that's really amazing. So these women, along with a lot of unnamed activists, right, forged a legacy of resilience and sisterhood and progress, and their efforts laid a crucial groundwork for the later successes of civil rights movements, right? Their stories really show us that change often comes through persistent grassroots actions, even under oppressive systems. And it really emphasizes that ongoing spirit of resistance and empowerment within the black community. So I want to repeat that one thing I just said. I think it's very important, and I want people to really tune in right now, because I'm not going to go into why I think it's important, but I want you guys to hear this story, these women's stories, right? Remind us that change comes through persistent grassroots actions, even under an oppressive system. If you know, you know. You know what I'm talking about. Okay? So let's move on, right? Let's get into Billie Holiday. This was the world that Billie was raised in. These were the women and the culture that she was raised around. So it's no surprise of certain things that happen. So we're gonna start with her early life, right? So Billie Holiday. By the way, Billie Holiday was tragically taken too soon, and her voice and her music, there's something about it. It hits this. I'm gonna use the word ephemeral. It's very like guttural. It's very like soft, secret spot in me, and that's my opinion. That just resonates, right? Billie was born Eleonora Fagan in 1915 into a Baltimore working class neighborhood. Her mother was raised in poverty and didn't really have a lot of stable family support, and that's partially due to the harsh, socioeconomical environment that they were in. And this situation really shaped Billie from the very beginning, and and really reflected the struggles that a lot of black families faced, right? At 9, Billie was sent to Catholic Reform School, meant to save troubled girls. The school was not nurturing. It was strict, it was punitive, and to all accounts, sometimes very cruel, right? Things that she went through as a child was locked in a room with a dead girl as punishment. You know, can you imagine being locked in a room with a dead girl? How much trauma you would experience, and how that would affect the rest of your life? That's just disgusting. And the fact that that even happened, right? I can't even, there's no words for it, right? You can tell that that trauma, along with all the others, probably really infused her music with this emotional depth and sorrow, right? And this may be why her performances were so unforgettable and her music was so, like, just, it just grabs you by the soul, right? I can't even, you know, and that's just one thing. That's just one thing because, you know, I mean, you know, I don't know. There was like no compassion at that school. That's what I would say. Like, I just, so, you know, that would catapult her, you know, and then in later life, you know, she was exposed to music. Baltimore was just alive with the sounds of jazz and blues legends like Bessie Smith and Louis Armstrong, right? So even during all this trauma, Billie was absorbing this rich musical environment, and she listened to records on her Victrola, and you know, and in neighbors' parlors, and music was a sanctuary, you know, as it is a lot of the times when there's trauma or poor conditions. Music becomes this escape, and a way to really express your emotional hardships. In a more palatable way for some people, right? Billie in her early teens began performing in small clubs and dive bars, and these venues were smoky and rough, and she was underpaid, but I think in some ways it helped her artistic development, right? The early gigs really gave her real world experience and helped shape her very unique vocal style and emotional expression. You know, these crucibles, might we say, of nightlife were where she learned to channel pain and life experience into song, right? Her formative years in Baltimore, both the beauty and the brutality, really sunk into and soaked into her music, right? She had this profound understanding of the blues. Like, she could turn personal heartbreak into like songs with that had like this tender fierceness, and I know that sounds counterintuitive, but that's the best way to explain it, right? But even after leaving Baltimore, that would permeate through her music, right? And so if we go into like the rise of her, right? We have to go to Pennsylvania Avenue, right? We have to go to that time, right? The 1930s and 40s, Pennsylvania Avenue was a cultural hub, right? This was jazz, African American culture, neon lights, nightlife. It was like this very vital place for Black Baltimoreans to like gather, to celebrate, to express themselves, right? You had the Royal Theater and the Comedy Club. And the Comedy Club was owned by Ike Dixon. And these were more entertainment spots, right? They were cultural sanctuaries and community centers as well. And it was kind of this rare refuge, these places that, you know, in a segregated city where Black artists and audiences could actually thrive, right? Billie Holiday performed on these iconic stages. She channeled her pain and passion into her music. I think that the thing that we have to look at when we look about her style is like she had this really unique phrasing and emotive style, and it set her apart from everybody. And this is why it caught attention of jazz legends like Count Basie and Lester Young, right? In fact, Lester Young was the one who gave her nickname. Her nickname is Lady Day, and that was pretty much became synonymous with who she was, right? In 1939, she had a big national breakthrough, right? In 1939, she stepped out of just Baltimore. She recorded a song called Strange Fruit, and it was really this I think you should go listen to it. It is groundbreaking and harrowing, and it's a protest song against lynching and racial violence. It has very graphic imagery, and because it was paired with this very haunting performance that became very prevalent with Billie Wade, it became a civil rights anthem, right? It highlighted her courage, but here's the thing. It happens to a lot of artists. Despite her fame, Billie's life was not a happy one. She had struggles with addiction. There was systematic persecution, and this included like multiple times she was arrested for drug possession. And these struggles kind of underscored the harsh reality of a society that celebrated her voice, but also then punished her for her vulnerabilities, right? Sadly, she died in 1959. She was just 44. And she was in a hospital bed under police guard. Not the way that this icon should have ended her life, right? But I will say that even despite, this tragic ending, her voice kind of still remains a symbol of emotional depth and defiance and artistic. Her legacy persists, right? There's definitely some places where her memory lingers, right? What I would say is that now, you realized I haven't really talked about her personal life. I haven't really talked about her ties to the community. And that's because, as I said in the beginning, she wasn't really out, right? But because she lived in a society with very restrictive norms, right? Especially when it came to gender and sexuality. There wasn't a lot of modern terminology, right? We have LGBTQIA, it's expanded, it's grown, everything, right? But her life and friendships were very, very intertwined with queer culture and communities, right? She moved in some pretty vibrant, fluid circles. And in these circles, a lot of the time, gender and sexual boundaries were kind of blurred a little bit, right? Jazz scenes in Harlem and beyond were really havens for marginalized people, and this included at the time LGBTQIA plus individuals. She had a few important relationships. Artie Shaw, who was a clarinetist and bandleader, was a very close friend who supported her music and her nonconformity. She performed alongside queer icons like Gladys Bentley, who was a black lesbian blues singer. She liked to wear Gladys liked to wear like tuxedo attire on stage, and these spaces were very vital for both safe havens and platforms, right? While here's the thing, like I said, she was never publicly labeled and her sexuality was never discussed by herself. There was a lot of rumors that suggested she had intimate relationships with women, and because there was no foundation, it really, this ambiguity, the ambiguity that comes from this really shows like this era's repression, and also her own defiant refusal to be boxed into any label, right? I think this makes her a spiritual predecessor to the LGBTQIA like visibility and resistance. Her voice and life story really resonates deeply with a lot of people in the community. She really shows like the pain of hiding and the triumph of self-acceptance. She was more than a jazz icon, more than a rebel. She was someone who like dared to love differently in a harsh world. And like I said, although she didn't come out, there were relationships that were discussed that lead most to believe she had some queer relationships. So at the very least, if we have to label her, which we don't have to, but I would say she was bi at the very least, right? Personal struggles, she had a lot. Her rise in the 1930s and 40s, she had addictions. She was very entangled with the law, like I said. Also, what I would say is, like, in 1947, the government revoked the cabaret license and barred her from performing in nightclubs and cabarets. And that was pretty devastating because it cut off really her primary source of income and her creative space. And this, I would assume, only, and there's no discussion, but I would assume that only served to exacerbate her addiction problems, right? But despite the setbacks, Billie still remained a pretty powerful artistic force. She refused to be silent until her death in 1959 at 44. And Strange Fruit obviously echoes through time. It's still used today. Her music transcended entertainment. It was a mirror that reflected social beauty and brutality. She is still an inspiration to a lot. She inspires artists and activists to just kind of speak their truth, create art demanding justice, and I think that's her legacy. That's her true legacy, and that's Billie Holiday. Once again, like, I know she wasn't labeled out and proud, but there's definitely enough there, and even if not, she was still a voice that resonated with the community. So that's Billie Holiday. She was indomitable. She was a powerhouse, and I want to thank you guys for joining me on this little journey through her life. I think she was an amazing woman, and I think if you want to chat about her, you can do that by reaching out through me, social media, or through my email. If you want to support the podcast, like, comment, share, follow, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Of course, you can kick cash my way through Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon. If you want more on this and so much more, check out my medium publication. And if you're into magical, mystical, spiritual things, please check out my other podcast. It's called Our Mystic Road Trip. And that's it for our journey through the life of Billie Holiday. I hope you enjoyed. I hope I inspired you to go check out more about her, learn more about the jazz movement and the queer community of the time and queer history. And as always, guys, until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and stay blessed.